The night was pitch black when Sarah, a young woman with an adventurous spirit, took the lonely road that cut through the dense forest. Tall trees blocked out the moon and stars, casting unsettling shadows across the narrow road. Drops of rain hit the car's windshield, creating a steady rhythm that increased the feeling of isolation. Sarah was in the middle of a long trip, and the deserted road was the shortest way to her destination. However, the loneliness and darkness around her began to bother her. She turned up the radio in hopes of easing the discomfort, but the distorted static and hiss only added to the feeling of isolation. As she made her way down the winding road, the feeling that she was not alone enveloped her like a cold blanket. His eyes were fixed on the area lit by the headlights, but his mind began to play tricks, causing him to see shadows moving in the periphery of his vision. To calm her nerves, Sarah began to sing a soft song, trying to ignore the feeling that something was watching her from the shadows. However, the words that echoed in the darkness sounded more like a lament than a comforting melody. Now, with her heart pounding and the feeling that something sinister was approaching, Sarah tried to convince herself that she was being paranoid. But when the trees on the side of the road whispered, as if they were whispering dark secrets, she could no longer ignore the fear that gripped her. At every turn in the road, she feared what might come out of the darkness. His fingers gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white with tension. And then, as she passed through a particularly dense area of forest, she saw something that made her catch her breath. There, on the side of the road, was a lone figure standing in the rain. A man soaked and muddy, wearing ragged clothes. He had his thumb up, signaling her to stop. Sarah slowed down and looked at the man, her heart beating fast. She knew she shouldn't hitchhike with strangers, but her compassion overwhelmed her. With a sigh, she stopped the car and rolled down the window. "You need help?" she asked, trying not to show the nervousness in her voice. The man looked at her, and his face was partially hidden in the shadow of the wet hood. "Please, I need a ride. My car broke down, and I'm stuck here." Sarah hesitated for a moment, remembering the horror stories about strangers on the road. However, the desperate expression in the man's eyes made her let her guard down. "Come in," she said finally. The man got into the car, thanking Sarah profusely. He was shivering from the cold and continued to look at the shadows of the forest. As they drove, he seemed evasive about his origin and destination. Their conversation was tense, with Sarah answering questions about her trip and her life story. However, the man seemed more interested in where she was going than sharing information about himself. As they approached the nearest town, the man's behavior became even stranger. He began to whisper unintelligible words, as if he were talking to himself. His eyes were fixed on Sarah, looking at her in a penetrating and frightening way. "Are you well?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. The man didn't respond immediately, but then looked at her with a sinister smile. "The night has just begun, my dear." The comment sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She could feel that something was very wrong. As they entered the city, she decided she could no longer ignore her survival instinct. "My destination is this place. You can get off here," she said, stopping the car at the curb. The man got out of the car without protest, still smiling unsettlingly. Sarah accelerated and took off at high speed, feeling like she had escaped something terrifying. However, fear would not leave her so easily. The dark night hid secrets she couldn't understand, and the sinister figure that hitched a ride with her still haunted her. As Sarah drove through town trying to shake off the unsettling feeling the stranger had left behind, she decided to find a place to spend the night. The city was small and quiet, with few cars on the streets, and she chose a modest and welcoming motel to shelter in. Sarah parked her car in the designated space in front of the motel and checked in. The receptionist, an elderly man with white hair and tired eyes, welcomed him and handed over his room key. He showed no surprise when he saw a lone traveler arriving late at night. In the motel room, Sarah turned on all the lights. The fear of the road and the disturbing experience with the stranger still tormented her. She wondered if the sinister figure had already disappeared from the city. While taking a hot shower to calm her nerves, Sarah noticed that she couldn't stop checking the bathroom door. The feeling that someone was watching her, that the mysterious figure was still nearby, wouldn't leave her alone. After her shower, she wrapped herself in a soft bathrobe and turned on the TV. But once again, static filled the room, and the distorted images on the television made her even more uneasy. Sarah decided to call home to tell her family about the strange experience on the road and feel a little safer. She took out her cell phone and dialed her mother's number. The phone rang a few times before her mother answered. "Hi, Mom. It's me, Sarah," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm fine, but something very strange happened on the road. A man asked me for a ride, and he was acting very strange." Her mother listened intently as Sarah shared the details of her experience. She tried to calm her daughter, saying that maybe the man was just someone who was mentally ill or was desperate for help. But Sarah wasn't convinced. That ominous figure and the chilling comment about the night just beginning remained fresh in his mind. After hanging up the phone, Sarah sat on the bed, contemplating her next step. She was determined to continue her journey the next morning, but restlessness would not let her sleep. It was then that she heard footsteps in the motel hallway. The steps were slow and deliberate, echoing in the silence of the night. Sarah stood frozen in fear as the footsteps approached her door. She took out her cell phone and dialed the reception number. The receptionist answered, and Sarah could barely speak, her voice a shaky whisper. "Someone is out there in the halls. Can you send someone to check, please?" The receptionist promised to send an employee immediately. As he waited, the footsteps outside his door became more audible, as if someone was standing there waiting. Finally, the motel staff arrived, and the mysterious footsteps stopped. They searched the hallway but found no one. Sarah explained the situation, but the receptionist seemed skeptical. "Sometimes we have residents who are a little strange here," he said. "It could have been one of them." Sarah wasn't convinced. She thanked the staff and carefully locked the door. No matter what the receptionist said, she knew the footsteps were real, as was the ominous figure on the road. They were related somehow, and she was determined to find out the truth. The next morning, Sarah decided to explore the city to try to understand the strange events of the previous night. She was determined to find out more about the man who had hitchhiked with her and the reason for his presence in that city. After a quick breakfast at a small local cafe, Sarah drove to the town's police station. She related what had happened and the description of the man who had disturbed her. The responding officer seemed sympathetic and said he would look into the matter. "We are aware that we have some unstable residents in the city, and we are doing our best to keep the peace," he explained. "But thank you for informing us. It might be useful to our investigation." After leaving the police station, Sarah decided to investigate further. She asked local residents if anyone had seen a strange man the night before, but no one seemed to remember seeing anything out of the ordinary. His next stop was the local library. She searched old archives and city newspapers, hoping to find some information about the road and the reason for the shadowy figure's presence. However, results were meager. She found only old stories about car accidents on the road, none of them related to the mysterious man. Frustrated, Sarah decided to go back to the motel and take a lunch break. While eating, she noticed a local newspaper on the nearby table. On the first page, there was a headline that caught his attention: "Dark History Haunts the City." Intrigued, she picked up the newspaper and began reading. The story told about a mysterious incident that occurred in the city decades ago. A car had rolled over on the dark, rainy road, killing the driver and seriously injuring a passenger. The surviving passenger, however, had mysteriously disappeared from the hospital before anyone could question him. Sarah looked at the photo that accompanied the article and recognized the man instantly. It was the same man who had caught a ride with her the night before. He hadn't aged a single day. Determined to find out more about the story, Sarah decided to visit the local hospital. She found the old records and discovered that the surviving passenger in the accident was a man named Thomas Granger. He had been treated at the hospital, but, as the newspaper said, he had disappeared without a trace. While looking through the records, a nurse approached her. He explained that he had worked at the hospital for many years and still remembered the case of Thomas Granger. "He was a strange man, always whispering incomprehensible things," said the nurse. "And after he disappeared, we heard stories about him wandering the roads at night, like a specter." Sarah thanked the nurse for the information and decided she needed to find Thomas Granger. She knew that the key to unlocking the mysteries of that city was related to him. As day turned to night, Sarah returned to the motel and waited in the darkness, determined to discover the truth about the man who had hitched a ride with her. She didn't know what she would find, but she was willing to face the dark secrets that surrounded Thomas Granger and the town he haunted. Night enveloped the city again, bringing with it the same uninterrupted rain that Sarah had encountered on the road. She was hiding in the motel parking lot, staring at the dark road, waiting for any sign of Thomas Granger. Hours passed, and the city was enveloped in silence, except for the persistent sound of rain. Sarah began to wonder if the mysterious man would return, if he was aware that he was being sought. Finally, just before midnight, she saw a figure emerge from the darkness of the road. The lone figure was drenched in rain, wearing clothes that looked as aged as the story that surrounded them. Sarah held her breath as he approached. Thomas Granger was there, just like in the old newspaper, with his empty eyes and enigmatic expression. He looked like he hadn't aged a day since the accident that occurred decades ago. Determined, Sarah got out of the car and faced the man. "You need to tell me what's going on," she said, her voice firm but tinged with apprehension. "You harassed me on the road, and there's something wrong with this town." Thomas Granger looked at her, his eyes shining with recognition. "You're brave," he murmured, "but you cannot understand the darkness that envelops this city." Sarah was intrigued and scared, but something compelled her to discover the truth. "Try to explain it to me," she asked. Thomas began to speak, revealing a dark story that involved the city's ancient secrets. Many years ago, the city was the scene of a macabre cult that worshipped supernatural forces and sought immortality. Thomas was a member of this cult, and during a sinister ritual, he suffered an accident that should have killed him. But something went wrong, he said. "I survived, but at a terrible price. I was cursed to wander this city at night, unable to find peace." He explained that over the years, the curse had spread, affecting other residents of the city. People who died on the dark roads came back to life like shadows, wandering forever. Sarah was horrified by the revelation, but also determined to help Thomas and the others affected by the curse. "What can we do?" she asked. Thomas was grateful for the offer of help, but explained that the curse was ancient and powerful. However, he had an idea. They needed to find the artifact that had been used in the ritual that had cursed him. If they could destroy it, perhaps they could break the curse. Their search for the artifact led them to an old abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. There, they faced mysterious traps and dark creatures that guarded the artifact. Finally, they found an ancient chalice covered in sinister runes. With the chalice in hand, Thomas began reciting ancient words in a desperate attempt to break the curse. Lightning and thunder shook the house, and the curse seemed to struggle. Sarah held the cup tightly, hoping that her actions could bring an end to all this darkness. And then, with a deafening crash, the curse was broken. Thomas Granger disappeared before Sarah's eyes, his final expression one of relief. The city, which had been haunted for decades, finally seemed free of the darkness that surrounded it. Sarah left the abandoned house with the destroyed chalice, a sense of triumph and relief washing over her. The city she had found that rainy night was finally free of the dark past that had haunted it. As she drove away from the city, the rain finally stopped. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she had faced the horror and triumphed over it. The dark history she had experienced would become part of the city's legends and mysteries, but now it was a turning page in her own journey. What Sarah didn't know was that although the curse on the city had been broken, the experience she had experienced would never leave her. She knew that the world was full of mysteries and horrors, and that darkness would always lurk in the shadows, ready to emerge and challenge the fearless to face it.